Yeah, we look as if we're live now. That's good to know. That's good to know. So let's do it. Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Livestreams today where we have the top 5 tracks from BTS on Spotify. And we're going to listen through them, and we're just going to review them, and we're going to hear what we think. So if we switch over to here, we have them on Spotify. These lovely individuals here on the screen. Now, I've heard a lot about BTS, but I'm not that familiar with them. I've heard that they've got a very loyal fan base, and I've heard that they've been very successful as musicians. They're like 206th biggest act in Spotify at the moment in the world, which is phenomenal. We're going to be listening through their top 5 tracks. How many billions of views have they got here? 2.3, 4, 5.5. So almost 7 billion plays on their tracks on YouTube, on Spotify alone, which is just wild, man. But we're going to listen through each of these 5 tracks from start till finish, starting with Left and Right. I'm just going to make sure I am live. That's good. Let's do it. Let's just get right into it. Left and Right. And just to confirm, this is off of this is Charlie Puth with Jungkook from BTS, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Let me know. Interesting panning there. Interesting, processing on the drums there for the moment. Great upper harmony there, nice. And so it's really interesting how you got those kicks go side to side there, left and right, kind of like the song title. Great adjustment to the chord progressions here. Chord progressions. Great adjustment of the chord progressions there. Very parallel minor there, chord-wise. Take up every corner of my mind. Your love stays with me day and night. I can feel you over here, I can feel you over here. You take up every corner of my mind. What you gonna do now? I can feel you over here, I can feel you over here. You take up every corner of my mind. What you gonna do now? Great. Okay, so that was a relatively inoffensive track. It's an interesting, like, so I don't think I've listened to Charlie Puth either. I've listened to him now, haven't we? What is this song about, Left and Right? I think it's about the fact that this person follows them wherever they go. And their memories, their dreams, what they recollect, and they can't escape it. And I think that that's it's something that a lot of people will be able to relate to. You know, it's one of those things where, like, you kind of get it. It's like, oh, I get it. You know, like, I think people can relate to struggling to get away from how things used to be. So yeah, I think the story makes sense. If you, what's done well with this track? I mean, I think the vocal performance is relatively inoffensive. You know, it's palatable. The singers involved have a nice sort of vocal texture and timbre to their voice. There's a little bit of tuning on some parts that you can hear from the vibrato and how they cling to the note, and I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, it helps, especially when you've wanted to a really nice, clean sort of mix. To be able to sort of like have things done like that makes sense. So that's cool. And I feel like there's enough sort of variety with the different sort of mixtures of head and chest voice in there to kind of keep things compelling reasonably. What else do we have? It's the way that the vocals go from the left to the right stereo field. I can hear you over here. I can hear you over here. You know, like that makes sense as well. Just simply going with the left and right theme, but also to sort of like just make things more intriguing and split up the different parts of the chorus there. The sound design is kind of intriguing for sure. And I feel there's enough variety within the different melodies and parts of the track itself to keep things sort of intriguing. So ultimately, like it's a safe performance, a kind of a catchy, kind of poppy performance there that I think does deliver the expression we need for this without overdoing it. And structurally, I think at 2 minutes 34, it's well fleshed out. It's nice and short. It works well for a single within that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. Where if it's less than 2 minutes, you might be missing a context that's required to be able to understand what's going on within the piece. And if it's more than 4 minutes, then you really need to arguably have more range compositionally or vocally within your piece, or have different chapters to a song. Lest you get yourself in a position where it simply just sounds a bit too generic. So with very sort of verse and chorus patterns there, with very little filler and an interlude at the end, like near the end, I think that was just really well handled there. The transfers were seamless. There were very few moments where you were wondering what was going to happen next. You get walked throughout, and it's palatable for sure. So instrumentally, yeah, I'm just sort of reinforcing things. So I think that there's this kind of like nice sounding little guitar line with some palm muted sort of chords and triads there. And they come in and they come out, the bass line reinforcing the root notes. The drums are kind of neat because there's like an eighth note groove across the drum kit, but then there's also some sort of filtered or flanged kind of tom fills that happen between sections, and they're just kind of an interesting sound within the piece there that helps to sort of like shake things up texturally as well as rhythmically. You take up every corner of my mind. What you gonna do now? And it's like the way that the vocals are the focal point and they get double tracked on the sides there. What you gonna do now? And then it goes into the center, and then boom, it's just sort of brought into the next part. And what's kind of cool as well is you can hear that subtle little pad in the chorus there, that mid to upper range resonance that kind of fills things up in a really sort of neat bow. It's just got a kind of a warmth to it where we're kind of, sounds like we're almost sort of like happy to have that person in our thoughts and in our life, even though if they're not literally physically there anymore. And I think it's interesting to have the kicks go from side to side as we go through the piece. So I pointed that out at the time, but just to really sort of reinforce that left and right there, it makes sense to me. So you have all these different parts. Yeah, no, it's articulate. It's interesting for sure. Just having a drink. Yeah, I mean, it's a song which I think is meant to sort of like, to be honest, I'm not sort of like familiar enough with Jungkook and Charlie Puth's vocals, textures and timbres or voices to be able to sort of pick them apart. But I think they both sort of worked off of each other really neatly. They were similar enough that you could go through this track with slight adjustments in a way that was still kind of meaningful. It wasn't overdone. And yeah, the bit of kind of trepidation near the end, but you go back to that final chorus. Like again, like things move smoothly. It's a competent performance with chemistry between the elements. Thematically, it sort of seems like it's trying to be relatively safe with the chord progressions and harmonies there, not trying to infer too much sadness there. It's meant to sort of be an easy listen, almost a little bit, I suppose, like subtly whimsical, as if to say, oh, you're over here, oh, you're over that way, like just kind of like pushing you backwards and forwards. And, I think it's palatable. It's palatable. I've said palatable a lot with this one. But you know, like there's nothing specifically with the music that's trying to infer a sense of connection to what we're talking about, really harmonically, in terms of the mood of the different triads or melodies or rhythms there, apart from the panning of the elements. So I think, just as a closing comment on this track, I think what's done really well here in terms of the studio production is not just the fact that the vocals are recorded quite well there, they're nice and clean and crisp within the mix there. It's the panning of different elements there, how they go backwards and forwards as the vocal takes on one side or the other, etc. The way things go backwards and forwards like a pendulum. It's clever stuff. It's very literal and on the nose. But, you know, it's kind of what you need to get through to us, you know. Sometimes that bluntness can be effective, and especially in this day and age, you kind of need to assume that you need to keep people's attention. Yeah, nailed it. So ultimately, I think, you know, nicely mixed and mastered, compression, you know, like dynamic range to it. No issues with the post-production, just honestly a really solid commercial grade track there from musicians who know what they're doing. So it was an interesting collaboration. Good start to proceedings here with left and right, should I say. This next track is Boy With Love. So this is actually another collaboration that BTS are doing with Halsey off of the Map of the Soul Persona album. So that's kind of cool. Let's do it. What have we got? Is that the start of the track? It is. So it's starting on the offbeat, without the root. Interesting, trippy sort of like synth and ether though. Sorry to interrupt, I feel like you get a lot of value out of this if you know Korean, but I do think it's cool that we have some parts in English as well, just so they're kind of both, you can understand bits that you need to know, I suppose. Oh, I know this. I know this song. Isn't it just crazy? I'll go back a little bit so I can hear out the chorus, but isn't it crazy how literally it is the chorus that is the thing that you recognize? That is the meter, I suppose, the indication of a well-written pop song. Is that the chorus is the thing you know? Great back and forth with the stereo field vocal-wise. And another vocalist in that range. Nice.
까놓고 말하길 나도 모르게 힘이 들어가기도 했어 높아버린 sky 커져버린 헛 때론 도망치게 해달라며 기도했어 But 너의 상처는 나의 상처 깨달았을 때 나 다짐했던 걸 네가 준 그 후세 나에게로 태양이 아닌 너에게로 Let me fly
Okay, so I'm going to take my time with this. You know, love is nothing stronger than a boy with love. Just want to kind of get a feeling of the vocals. All right, that makes sense. So this is Boy with Love, featuring Halsey, off of the Map of the Soul Persona album here. So what do we think about this track? Clearly, I think one of the strengths of this track is having the entirety of BTS in there with the various vocalists in there. They have their different respective like vocal pitches, and some people do the rapping, and some people do the singing, and some people do maybe sort of like lead stuff, and others do sort of like higher head voice falsetto kind of stuff there to really fill out the frequency spectrum. But Halsey on board as well to kind of reinforce things and have like a lady's voice. It kind of works well as well. I kind of dig that. I think. But what is the track about? Effectively, I think it's about sort of like someone like really interested in that boy with love and just kind of getting that feeling to get stronger and stronger. And I don't just want it to be like a casual thing. They want the full extent of that love, you know. Come be my teacher, you know, your every picture. It's a very romantic song. It's very much kind of like a coming of age. Kind of like a coming of age situation there. I mean, these are very sort of like pretty gentlemen, so I expect that there will a lot of the stuff that they'll put out is potentially going to be that kind of boy band kind of aesthetic, the kind of stories of like love and relationships and attraction and all that kind of wholesome kind of goodness. That's been a staple of pop music for like the last century, or at least since like the 50s, I suppose. And it's great. It's incredibly effective. So Halsey has a distinctive vocal texture and timbre that suits this mix well when they come in the chorus parts there. And then and it's just a catchy kind of rhythm and phrasing with that, but also they call and respond with a lot of what BTS are doing. So that's cool. So I think ultimately Halsey features well within this track. But I think the strength of this song, again, as I mentioned, is the variety of the ways in which BTS can communicate. So it's not just that we can sing well and that we can rap well. We can have that more sort of like sung conversational tone in the verse. And then we can have the different rappers in the second verse. And then we can kind of like deliberately split a tune in half and have that vocal diversity in there by proxy of having so many people involved. And that is a strength that is not paralleled in a lot of other genres, because typically you just have that one lead. You might have backing vocalists, but with boy bands and girl bands specifically, you have this wonderful environment where if you are able to sort of build a brand and sort of like pop off, you got like a long sort of success story ahead of you, because you just have so many different options in terms of how you sort of tell your story musically, as well as with the multimedia audio visual experience. You know, you see this little thing here and there's lots of bright colors, and it's all very kind of like charming and pastel and stuff like that, and it's very sort of like cute aesthetic. And I think that it's really just clever songwriting and sort of like structural input, like planning, management of the music itself, to have these different vocalists in different ways articulating their strengths there. They rap well, the words come through clearly, there's a great sense of flow and polish to that. The sung parts and the various ranges from the different musicians, they each have their own texture and timbre as well, so that they do stand out, so that you can tell who is who and what's doing what. And so that's really well done. And typically, despite the changes in approach between different vocal styles, you can kind of understand what we're talking about. Again, a lot of it was in Korean, so I don't necessarily understand what's going on there. But I think there was enough in here for like an English audience to kind of get the kind of the box of fluffies kind of stuff. And yeah, so I think the vocals are handled incredibly well throughout this. The music kind of becomes a bit of an afterthought. Like, it's a groovy track with the bass line and the funkiness of it, like the single coil guitar parts with the bar chords, etc. The drum beat with the very sort of like kick, cymbal and snare patterns. But a lot of the vocal point of this is the vocals. The singers are what matter within this. If we start, we have those kind of like sort of calypso plucks as well as the bass line underneath there, but you've immediately got vocals on the side there. And they go between the sides and the main and stereo field. So like structurally versus, choruses and like we had like the double chorus at the end or something like that. Oh no, we have another time through of the sort of rapped parts at the end before that final chorus. They're probably a halftime part. I mean, I know I just listened to it, but it's there's a lot's taken on the first listen, to be fair, So I mean, like the strings are a nice sort of like held note in the background there. They resonate neatly harmonically with what Halsey is doing. And it's nice to have sort of punchy elements to kind of work towards kind of like to have a rhythmic unison there. I think that's fun there. So it's like the different sort of string or sort of drum parts there are acutely aware. They've got situational awareness there. And like there's little bits of adjustment with, again, having the drums as a sometimes thing there. You can hear like little tambourines there. So it's nice and cheery and vibrant, like no harsh textures. Instrumentally, no real edge to it. We're not trying to make a kind of spicy sounding track here. It's meant to be like a kind of airy, kind of breezy, happy song there talking about, boy love. And you got like the phone filters of Halsey as well in some parts, which is equally a production decision as well as a compositional part, simply to have these different call and responses and little bits of extra ear candy as well to kind of facilitate that. I mean, there's clear intention and it's very well thought out, like it's polished stuff. I understand why they're tremendously successful. But again, as I mentioned, there's not really any other lead elements outside of the vocal components. And I do wonder if that is going to be a consistent thing across the board of this top 5. And I don't think they need to have other additional lead elements. Again, the reason, one of the benefits of having so many vocalists in a band, even within BTS alone, is that you just have so many options. Like you can just, it's enough of a lead shift to have that different person do that. So yeah, no, it's great. It's well done. And I think as well, for the people that are sort of intimately familiar with the act, they'll probably have their favorite member of the band. And so they'll be waiting for that person's time. And I suppose or assume that they'll probably sort of play around with when people come in to kind of sort of mess with expectations a little bit. So yeah, no, it's neat. Yeah, but basically all you need with this track is just a really kind of like floral sort of string line with the guitar, strum guitar parts there, the whole tones and nature of the bass there, the drums with a mixture of different quarter, eighth, and 16th note grooves, and just knowing when to sort of space out, allow things to kind of float for a minute before coming back in with the kind of oomph of the hook. So ultimately pretty well fleshed out for the most part. Great collaboration with Halsey and BTS. They suit each other well, great chemistry. Studio production-wise, commercial grade in regards to its interpretation there, nicely glued. Things go between the sides of the stereo field, such as the different vocal takes going back between the middle and sides there. There is a little bit of dynamic range in terms of like the perceived dynamic range of the piece, the perceived intensity of certain components. Like I do like what's going on with the just with going on, even in the parts where like things are more sort of like less drum oriented there, things still seem like they're kind of reasonably well leveled. And again, at the state where BTS are and Halsey are at this point, you'd be surprised if there were any errors at all, just with how well polished things are nowadays. So yeah, honestly, kudos. No surprises there. But we have track number 3, I suppose, which is Dynamite. Probably their biggest song, if I'm not mistaken. Off of B 2020.
I'm walking home, jump up to the top of the brown. Ding dong, call me on my phone. Nice tea, and I'll get my ping pong. This is dead heavy, can't hear the bass boom. I'm ready.
great chord note accent there with the kicks. So, like, how many different changes or different variations of, like, vocal lines do we have here between the singers and the chorus alone? I mean, like, I know there's a key change later in this piece. I have heard the song before. But again, it's one of those tracks where a lot of the really intriguing stuff is going on vocally, and instrumental parts, while sounding really great, are there to sort of, like, serve that purpose. The claps sound like a group working together, though. That's kind of cool. Is there like someone with an especially feminine voice within the band? Is there like someone with an especially feminine voice within the band? Because I'm hearing like a really sort of soft texture that someone's just it's got a really sort of like it's got a sweetness to it. I could be wrong. Great adjustment with the brass here. I'm gonna pause for a sec. Is there like tuning on the vocals? Not to fix it, because they can clearly sing, but like there's an interesting effect on their voice where I think it's done the right way. Sometimes people will use sort of tuning or like effects on vocals to kind of make sort of fix a poor vocal performance. They can clearly sing. So that's not the issue here, but it's just kind of a cool sort of like electronic feel to it that kind of just makes it a bit more sort of like vibrant. And I dig the tone of it. Like mild vocoder or something like that. That was a really satisfying key change, by the way. No, so that's actually like, I unironically like that song from BTS, Dynamite. Maybe that's a basic choice, but I don't really care. I do. I really like this one. Genuinely. It's a really well-written track. There are things like that have been done from previous two that are like a little bit sort of like more interesting to me, like the key change at the end. I like the addition of the brass in that late second half there, just to sort of spice things up a little bit, add a bit more kind of bit of a grandiose nature to it. Kind of like you're going into the clubs and things are starting to pop off a little bit for it to rise and then have the key change. It's just really wonderful. But what is this track about? You know, what is Dynamite about? So I think basically it's like talking about going out and hitting the clubs and partying and just having a fantastic time. It's done in a way which is very sort of like family friendly as well, which I think is clever. It's all in English as well, so I'm assuming that this was potentially for like, I remember like hearing this in a movie, so like a movie soundtrack or something like that. But they also just know their audience. They understand that there's like this was done in 2020, you know, so they had a bit more sort of like global awareness at this point. And I dig the decision there. It was just a really smart choice to sort of do it all in English. Again, it's great that they sing Korean. It makes total sense. But to have one single done completely like this is just really dope. So yeah, awesome. So I think the story is compelling. It's interesting to have one simply that like it's just a genuinely positive, vibrant piece, and that's something where I think it's incredibly valuable. I don't know when this was released in 2020, November 2020. So people were just having a pretty terrible time in 2020 with COVID and everything like that. And releasing a track where it was more about getting out and sort of exploring the world and having a fantastic time and getting excited to be able to live and celebrate again is something that is remarkably poignant when you consider that time and place. I actually adore the fact that they released that then. I think that's a beautiful time to have done that as very sort of like aware of things, and I it's very smart. So the story is fantastic. I think this is a song where it really shows that BTS don't need to collaborate in order for things to really pop off. Like, I think part of why they might have worked with Halsey in 2017 was maybe to work with other Western artists in case they weren't doing so already. I'm not really sure when BTS started popping off, but I assume that it was potentially like in around the 2020s, late 2010s, early 2020s. So it makes sense that they were working with other artists, but here they show that they are more than able to do things completely by themselves. I think this is my favorite track of the three so far today, primarily because it's just, you could have, it's just, what are the vocals mainly through this? It's just more sort of like clean vocals, right? Again, there's like rapping, but it's like kind of upbeat there. It's kind of suave and cool and hip and kind of groovy, and it's got a nice sort of like awareness of the rhythmic elements behind it there. It coalesces neatly with the quarter note accents on the kit there with the kicks and stuff like that. We have a great mixture of those sort of like rapped verses, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of what Bruno Mars was doing around that point. But I think that what kind of elevates it, I think, to an extent, is simply that we have all those different vocal takes in the mid to high parts for those harmonies in the chorus sections, and there's like a kind of a sweetness to other elements, and other parts are a bit more sort of like savvy, and it kind of gives you maybe an interpretation or an impression of all the different people you might meet whilst you're clubbing. You know, it's just like lots of fun ideas, and it's typically not simply one person sort of singing or rapping either. It's other people sort of working with each other, and it's the act kind of working off each other and trying all sorts of fusions of different tones and textures, which is really, really smart. And like the falsetto is clean, and there are just lots of different voicings of certain words and lines that they are repeated. Don't get me wrong, they're not completely random, but we are deliberate with our place to put which vocalist and which to harmonize with which, and they just always kind of smacked. And no complaints at all about the vocals. At this point, we're comfortable with their vocal technique and everything like that. There was some sort of like synthetic elements on certain parts of it, which just kind of gave it a bit more of a sort of like a futuristic feel, and that was fun as well. And yeah, honestly, you look at this track and how it was covered by that front, and it was really neat. But also, it's just the track itself at 3 minutes 19 is just another really well fleshed out piece. You know, go back to the start. You immediately start with the chorus, and that's so strong there. You have a certain amount of instrumental backing, but you get an immediate feel. You understand that it's BTS the moment you hear it, and it's just completely just. And then you have like the verse afterwards, and you get more of the kind of groove and the rhythmic elements there, kind of building things up and establishing a pace. And there's just an incredible tone to a lot of the various sort of instrumental components. So, for example, I think that the drums are produced really well there. I think they've just got a nice kind of roundness and bounciness to them. They're not too heavy and thuddish. They're kind of like, they poke at the mix a little bit and sidechain neatly. But again, it's very slick in its presentation there. It's trying to get you moving as opposed to kind of weigh you down. And there's like claps, like people are grooving at the club and kind of clapping in time with the music. It's very kind of funky. And like, I just don't know what more you could ask for in that regard there. It's well fleshed out with the percussion there. The bass line with electric bass just sounds thick and full of life. And it's vivacious in the low and mid range when it kind of goes up a little bit. And it explores outside of just the root notes as well, which is really, really slick. And there's like just these wonderful moments of fragility there where we really just kind of, I suppose, just allow things to kind of like float even more than they usually would. Like the kind of the synth like boom, boom. They're very kind of spacey, and it's kind of like you're floating in space when you hear that. And like the actual way that the guitars are implemented as well as the claps and other elements without having the bass too heavy into that build before that key change is neat because it's split around the stereo field asymmetrically. You're kind of like, why are all these different things here? And then it kind of goes up into the chorus, up into the key change there. And you just get a different representation of the chorus that you've had kind of drilled on the entire time. And I think that when they were making this track, they were acutely aware that it would just be too much of the same when they did that. So they decided to sort of step away from that. So again, it's just and they just sound like they're incredibly excited to be there. Like there's a genuine display of positivity through the way they're singing there. There's the energy and charisma is palpable. It's dynamic. And the brass as well, when it highlights certain notes within the triads, as well as kind of forming its own sort of notes that bounce off of the different vocal patterns. It's just, they're a great sort of like accompaniment there. And it's just, again, I think it's the key change as well as the addition of elements even at the halfway point outside of what's instantiated prior in a way is very solid. It's just the extra sort of bonus points we're going for here. I mean, thematically, it's just basically, it's very kind of 70s funk with the guitars. And so you have an interesting sort of like bass line which kind of loops within itself in like an AABA structure across the chorus. And I think the key change is what saved it from being too sort of monotonous with its progressions. I'm just trying to have a think about whether there's many changes with the actual bass line or chord progressions through the piece. I don't think there is. I think there's just changes with how things are represented, which is even more impressive because we didn't need to pull out any sort of like crazy chord changes or shifts or transfers. But it makes sense why they did things in regards to how the song was sort of like put forward and perplexed. I don't think you could have gone further than that final key change, which is why I think they stopped there. So it's like what works as the theme is just it's more sort of meant to sound like a dance track with BTS kind of performing full facets on top of it with more of a kind of sort of like a synth, occasionally synthy sort of like enwrapped kind of pattern there just to kind of fully flesh out things within the actual vocal range as well to kind of make it more exciting with the instruments rhythmically and harmonically doing enough to sort of elevate it with the key change at the end. Studio production wise, it's another well commercial grade track there with all the vocals coming through cleanly. No issues with the EQing or like stereo field there. The stereo field is music surrounds you in the headphones with various sort of like ways of representing certain instruments. I think that, you know, there's dynamic range to it, but it's still glued incredibly well. And it's nice and loud without pumping as per the others, so the bus compression and limiting are handled. Again, it's just another really good effort, man. So, like, I'm not going to pretend that I love all three of these tracks today, but I think that I prefer Boy With Love to Left and Right, although I do prefer, I think it's just more Charlie Puth that I'm not necessarily super in love with. I heard Charlie Puth just, I don't know. I prefer the energy of these other two tracks to Left and Right. Charlie Puth just sounds like an easy listening kind of dude, but it's nice to hear this range from BTS with a bit more sort of like upbeat stuff. We've got Fake Love, number 4. Oh, Love Yourself, Tear. It's crazy how they suddenly went through their edgy phase. I kind of dig that they can not only tap into more upbeat, kind of more contemporary, safe pop stuff, but they've also got these kind of sad arpeggios with these interesting extensions in the harmonies. Great use of the 808 there, fantastic tone to the portamento there. Great call and response between rapping and vocals. You can hear that kind of wistful guitar in the background there with those octave chords there. I just love the depth to the way they sort of structure and like layer things. So we've got different sort of synth pads, as well as the piano, as well as the bass. The 808 is really well produced. Like that 808 is really well produced. I love how well leveled it is in the mix. They just the smoothness of it and how it goes between those notes there. Excellent. Sorry, that might have been a bit loud in the headphones. Excellent. So that was Fake Love by BTS. A very different direction to the previous tracks I've had there. I'd say this is probably one of my favorite songs, although I think I like it equally to Dynamite. Part of the reason I enjoy it is simply because I'm personally more so like acclimated to a lot of the more kind of emo, edgy kind of stuff. I kind of dig that stuff. It's not that I like that they're unhappy or that they're talking or going through the stuff, but it's just simply that I prefer my music with a bit of edge to it. So it's great to know that we could like kind of handle that in a way which is still kind of quote unquote poppy without being too like too generic. You know, like what is this track about? I think it's basically about trying to find some sort of like validity and truth within a relationship that we're in. And they're just sick of the fake love. They're sick of things not being meaningful. They just want to find some sort of like anchor and virtue and value within the situationship that they're involved in. So I think that's a story that a lot of people will be able to relate to for sure. So in terms of like what was actually done well within this track, I think the vocals here. I like the fact that there were a couple of things done different than the previous tracks. There was more, I think, more range rhythmically, just the rhythm rapped parts within the verses and stuff like that. And I like the fact that they could go between the kind of the triplets. They had room to breathe and sort of do their own thing. There were also some parts we had rapped vocals and then we kind of fed off with the cleans. They were really cool. That was nice to have that kind of back and forth. And the verses were not predictable. They changed verse lines within each of the kind of the chorus parts before the main fake love parts, the main hooks. They're like the pre-choruses going into them. So there was adjustment as the story kind of unfurled. And, we move through this and we go, okay, what else works well? And it was simply the fact that we had those kind of like vocoder kind of synthesized kind of vocals, those fake love parts going up to the higher range there. And it was just a kind of cool kind of it was that kind of synthetic effect, electronic effect on the vocals that's done well and colors it neatly and in regard to like the 808s and the verse that other synth pads and guitars and bass and drum elements within it. I think, so ultimately there's a wide variety of different vocal takes within this, but they were all handled well. And I think that we did communicate, especially in some of the kind of more quiet, low-key, lower range parts where we kind of there's a melody like that. And it just kind of sounds very kind of somber and sullen, like they're really going through something. And it's believable. And you have like immediately so much stuff, so many points of interest going on. There's a real crispness to the vocals there. And we have the guitar arpeggios playing with those minor triads. They're working those around with some extensions there to show a bit of complexity with those emotions. A kind of an interesting kind of upper range, kind of warbly kind of synth lead there for a bit of mystery or kind of suspense there. I think in terms of the guitar parts, there are also some sort of like overdriven guitar octave chords in some of the chorus parts for a bit of a kind of edge on the sides there. The 808s and it's a lot as the bass for a lot of it was really neat. Like the polish to those, as well as the note choices with the root notes in those chorus sections, are fantastic. I just love how the bass was handled as well, and the smoothness of the portamentos within that. If we look at the drums, like it was predominantly sort of like a kick focus. There were some cymbals occasionally. And we like having rises and we have those kind of claps and cymbals picking us up there. And we explore those kind of trappish kind of percussive elements there in a way that does fit well with the 808s and then those guitar arpeggios, kind of like that sad kind of emo rap kind of vibe. And I like the sort of sub drops with those crashes and like the halfway points of each of the choruses just for an extra kind of oomph there. It adds a bit of sort of tension to it, which I think is lovely. And we have these kind of ethereal, kind of like warm, kind of like soothing pad elements and other leads, sub leads and stuff in there, and it's just really pretty in terms of how it's orchestrated. You can tell they're going through a terrible time, but it does so in a way that seems grounded. And you can hear like more subtle elements, like the synth sequences, the bomb, 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 bomb. Like those parts in the background, where it's really simply just like a ticking time bomb to the when they kind of like blow up and really get sick of the fake love. And there's like other kind of guitar leads and other sort of bits of air candy in there as well. But those are the main instrumental elements. There's just enough in this 4-minute track to kind of keep us going throughout. I think structurally, just to comment on that, if we had had a song where it didn't change this pre-chorus messaging so that we could kind of get more of a sort of like an understanding of their position where they're at, it would have just felt a little bit too repetitive. So I'm really glad that they switched things up to give us more story as they went, so that as we focused on the vocals at a focal point, we kind of got it. We got a little bit more as we kind of listened through it. Thematically, minors with extensions indicate a sense of like loss or profound sort of sadness there. We just sort of sound like we're done. When we go up to upper range, we're kind of crying out there. The mixture again of like the kind of the trap drums, the guitar bass, the kind of sad emo kind of rap though, that kind of vibe from the late 2010s was like prevalent as a really big thing back then. So I understand part of why we might be going for it, but I also think it's a story that they might have needed to tell, simply to sort of show more range in terms of how they're actually approaching things as human beings as well as musicians. So I think the music tells the story well, but part of it's also the instrumental choices as well that create or facilitate that atmosphere and quote unquote aesthetic and ambience, and the vocals are the icing on the cake. Again, another well-produced track there. Great use of kind of like radio filter vocals, getting rid of the lows at some point, like at the start, sort of like made the vocals a bit more intense at first, full range later on with things sort of like leveled and sort of like spread well with the guitar, bass, drums, synths, and everything else going on with the different vocal takes there. Nice sort of like tuning and treatment of the vocals there to make them a bit more sort of like edgy and sort of synthetic. I like that. And the coloration in general is fantastic. There is dynamic range, but it's still glued nicely, and it's nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression limiting is handled. Again, like at this point, I would hesitate to ever imagine that there would be a poorly produced track from BTS, because the people they've got working behind them, in addition to the people that they're collaborating with, there's literally no reason for anything to ever be wrong with their production. But you never take it for granted, right? Anyways, we've got one more track for today. My Universe. Now, I'm not a massive fan of Coldplay. But we're going to listen through it, and we're going to, quote-unquote, enjoy ourselves. Let's go. Interesting bluesy decision there from Chris. I take issue with like the way that this is presented and the feel of the song. I think I've just been too desensitized into like dopamine addiction addled to sort of like find this as intense as the audiovisual experience is showing me. When I see something like that, it's like, oh my goodness, we're going on a crazy adventure through the universe, but it's such a chill sounding song at the same time that it doesn't necessarily feel like that. I mean, it's a catchy song innately, you know. It's interesting because I kind of interpret that as they're trying to match the vocalist for Coldplay's vocal style. And because I don't necessarily like the way that the guy from Coldplay sings, I don't know if I necessarily like the way that they're singing within this, even though I still appreciate their vocals. There's just an interesting kind of like way that Chris does things. See, that's a fun idea, I suppose, having like the vocoder kind of really committing to it, I suppose. I mean, there's a nice transition to that chorus. I suppose this is kind of intriguing, eh? The way they've kind of chopped it a little bit. I mean, I think that's neat. Honestly, like that end part where they kind of had like the pause, with the little sort of like the universe held within that gap, and then they suddenly go back to like an instrumental version with occasional vocal parts on top, and the way they kind of chopped it and sliced it up was probably the most interesting part of the song for me, for the most part. That's what is the song about? I think effectively it's about how you know, when the morning comes, I watch you rise. There's a paradise they couldn't capture, that bright infinity inside your eyes. I mean, I'd like to imagine they're talking about the sun or something a little bit kind of like different, but I think that they may be talking about another person that they're with. I had someone comment on my Taylor Swift live stream, and they said, "Oh boy, another person who assumes it's about relationships." That's because, like, no, that's Occam's razor. You know, you assume by the lyrics that they're talking about that. And if they're secretly talking about something else and they haven't made it clear, that's them being playing themselves, you know? That's them playing themselves. They can have that joke, be like, haha, you assumed it was that. But if it's a riddle, at least give us a clue. You know what I mean? So my universe, it seems like it's about enjoying someone else's presence in your life and you wanting to put them first and sort of take care of them. And I'm not really a massive fan of Chris Martin. I don't. I've seen him. I remember watching one of his live takes, and like having a horrific time because he just wasn't taking it seriously. He was either on something or he was just having a terrible time. And I just he sung very poorly, and I think I just lost a lot of respect because I watched him do it live, and just realized no, he can't. He just needs so much help. The rest of the band are fantastic in Coldplay. They're fantastic musicians, but I've seen Chris and he's just you know, just not impressed really. Um, Outside of that, though, within the spec of the studio release, I think that he sung well. Again, some of his mannerisms within the verse parts are a little bit kind of quirky, and he's very much his own kind of storyteller. And people, I mean, Coldplay are fifth in the world. Coldplay are the fifth biggest act in the entirety of Spotify at the moment. They are huge. So who am I to be a contrarian, right? People dig that. So personally, for me though, there's just some kind of weirdness or quirkiness with some of the ways he does it, where he's trying. It's like a 7-year-old trying to sound like a 30-year-old, and it's just very kind of weird. I think that BTS, they sung well here. It was great to listen to them, and I think there was more variety with like the rapped parts in terms of like how that worked with the sung parts and how they kind of spliced to expect things at different parts there. It was a very kind of like subdued performance from BTS here. That was simply, I think, what they were trying to do, arguably, is to write a song with Coldplay, and they clearly were very passionate about trying to keep everyone involved happy. And so, you know, clearly Coldplay was the focus. And BTS got in there as well. And I dig what they were trying to do there. They told the story they needed to. It was great to have them collaborate, and I still think I prefer BTS's solo stuff more. But I think, you know, you gotta explore your horizons, explore your universe, even if they're someone else's, you know. So okay, the vocals were handled well from all parties there, and I think the bluesy kind of decisions, to be fair, for Chris Martin were kind of neat with the way they kind of played around with chromatics to kind of add a bit of edge and kind of sauciness to it. And amongst a lot of the kind of feel-good, kind of like clean orient of like the piece in general there, it's a very much a kind of safe composition outside of that, with different verses and choruses, with the exception of that outro section, where we just kind of had a gap there where we kind of floated in this sort of like space, and then suddenly there was like a reinterpretation, a remix of the main theme behind it. I mean, like you have the chorus takes with the sort of like the kind of the funky guitars with the single chords, they're playing bar chords and such. You have the bass line being picked and kind of like played across the part. You have a really competent percussion drum performance there with a mixture of different sort of like quarter eighth and 16th note grooves on the acoustic drum kit there, with some cool decisions made with like fills and kind of going between parts there. And I liked how things rose and kind of came down between the different parts to show clear dynamic range. And I think like some of the synth decisions, how they kind of were kind of like sparkly in some elements there, and there were pads that shone neatly in the mix and harmonized neatly with what Coldplay and BTS were doing. They were great. And other parts where they were kind of like a bit quirky with like the vibrato on the leads, they were kind of neat. And like we have sequences going around the sides of the stereo field there, and we have adjustments of different synth leads and patterns there. It's not, we can clearly establish and kind of create environments for people to sort of exist in within this track. They're capable and competent with that. And there's lots of different vocal takes and additional kind of like choral parts and stuff like that. They know how to explore a track and kind of make it explode there, to their credit. And I kind of listen to this, and they've got 2 or 3 sort of clear chapters that they go between with having different people doing different parts. And yeah, as a collaboration, I think it works well. Thematically, I think that it was meant to be more sort of like a spacey sounding track with those synth elements there to kind of make it sound like the universe. The blues part with like the different vocal melodies from like Coldplay, as well as like some of the BTS singers and some of their sort of sung bits, were kind of neat. There's a good amount of adjustment and variety, including the unexpected end part there with that remix kind of chopped up part of the main sort of motif. And it's kind of very sort of safe and palatable. It's neat with how kind of like well behaved the parts are written there. And it's very sweet with how it kind of nuzzles into each other like a cozy warm blanket there. There's a bit of push with the drum kit, but not as much as you had prior. So effectively, it's just trying to sort of sound magical and have everyone collaborating on it or collating on it agree with that. And I think ultimately the chord progressions of the choices there are sort of bright and shiny. And there's never a moment there where you feel, oh, this is an unexpected sort of like sound. I did not expect this to be in here. It's like the safest music. And it works. And again, incredibly successful. They've had like 1.47 billion plays. So clearly people like it. Studio production wise, it's you know, the vocals come through clearly. Chris Martin's do, as well as BTS's. I prefer BTS's drum sounds. I just think that the drums didn't have as much body to them in this one. But that's probably a deliberate decision on their part. Maybe they're using an acoustic, or simply they just didn't want to have a thicker sound to it. And that's fine. The guitar takes the bass, the synths, etc. The sequences, any sort of like bits of ear candy, they're well balanced within the frequency spectrum and stereo field, as per previous comments. And ultimately, yeah, it's all I've got to say about this one, really. I think that having like the chopped up, and I've said chopped like kind of like the stutters, and the remix at the end were kind of cool. Just I'm assuming that's more of an album thing rather than a single thing, but they included it anyways. So yeah, it's kind of a weird one to finish on. So I think we're going to talk about BTS as an overall act now. Going to go to the conclusion. Of the top 5 Spotify for BTS, we've got Left and Right, Boy With Love, Dynamite, Fake Love, and My Universe. So, what do we want to say about this? I think, yeah, I'm just going to be honest with you. I think that BTS are best when they're on their own. I think that BTS as a group are best when they're on their own. They're best when they're on their own, and they're so respectful to the people that they collaborate with, to the point where I don't necessarily think it's really helpful for them to do that. I mean, the work with Halsey, with Boy With Love was fine. The one with Charlie Puth was fine, and I know that wasn't all of BTS. And with Coldplay, My Universe was fine. There was nothing musically incorrect or kind of like faulty about it. It's a lot of it is subjective. But I think Fake Love and Dynamite were like my favorite songs today because it simply allowed them to do whatever the hell they wanted. And I think that's when BTS shines. They really do shine when they're in their own universe. In terms of what these tracks are about, typically they're about trying to find validation within a relationship or showering the person with love or allowing love to get bigger. About like trying to sort of move on from people, sort of being reminded of them left and right. Dynamite was fun simply because it sounded like it was about going out clubbing and celebrating. And I think that during the COVID period when that was released, it was just a really smart time to launch a song like that. So I think that was really neat. And then My Universe, I think, was about sort of getting stuck in Chris Martin's universe and BTS trying to make sense of it. And yeah. I mean, I think that there is always a time and place for these types of stories in music. And it can be kind of sad when people feel afraid to sort of do things outside of relationships and pop songs, which is again why I'm thankful that Dynamite exists. Granted, a lot of the biggest songs are usually that because a lot of people can relate to those. But then it's also a deliberate design decision on, you usually decide which is going to be your single. You usually kind of lure a person in with a single so they can listen through an album. But I don't think BTS needs to prove themselves at this point. They're massive. So I think part of a big reason why BTS work as a concept is that they're just so defined with their vocals. They are so deliberate and well thought out with it. They know which member does what, who is rapping, who is in the lower mid range for their vocals, who is in the upper range, who's got like kind of a softer, kind of sleeker, more kind of like less kind of like heavy voiced, kind of do the kind of lighter, fluffier stuff. They know how to. They know how to sort of like structure things in a way which makes a lot of sense within a track, and that's part of why I also don't feel that they need to have other people involved in terms of their stuff. I think they can just handle it on their own. I don't think that like they should only do like, I'm not trying to tell them what to do clearly, but like, and I think that there's merit to those tracks and I understand why people like them, but they don't need it. With some musicians, they will only have their vocal texture or timbre in their way of looking at things. And the problem with that is that you are left with this kind of situation where they're limited by that, by proxy of only having themselves. So that's why you have people work with other musicians. Here, they, like with Fake Love, it was a very different feel to Dynamite. They're incredibly adept at expressing themselves, whether they're rapping or singing, harmonizing, rapping with vocals, singing, etc. Very comfortable in their respective head or chest voices. Very well polished. Fantastic to listen to. Very easy to listen to. I didn't mind that it wasn't all in English, thank you, Raymart. I appreciate that. Hopefully you're having a good day. Welcome to the live stream. It's just they can handle whatever is thrown at them, I think, because of the work they've done to really sort of polish themselves as musicians. And you just can't take for granted. And so I think the vocals are very well thought out over the board there, and they are very adept and able to sort of like do what they need to get things moving there. But it's also the fact that they can remain sort of like relevant despite what they're talking about and what it like across these different tracks, but also keep these songs sounding reasonably unique. There is a different feel to each of these 5 tracks. But vocals to Nick solid. Structurally, a lot of these songs were like 2 to 4 minutes. And I think that's really the length you need for them. The risk you have when you write a song that's longer than 4 minutes, even with Fake Love, is that if you don't have enough diversity structurally, like with the different bass lines or chord progressions or anything like that, with the percussion, etc., or if your story doesn't develop over time, it's just simply the same message or sort of sound being repeated. And with Fake Love, the reason that worked well is that we had different pre-chorus sort of messagings and stuff like that, and the adjustments with the way that we rapped and sort of interacted with each other within the verses. And we kind of that was the main focal point with the vocals with that song as well as the rest of the 5. But unlike a lot of the other tracks, even Dynamite potentially, because with Dynamite, the thing that really sort of spiced it up was the brass coming in near the end as well as the key change. With Fake Love, it's a situation where you kind of understand more about the kind of perilous situation that they're in, and you really start to feel for them. It's the intimacy and honesty of the way they express themselves vocally at the start amongst those guitar arpeggios, and with the bass and like trap, the kind of sad emo rap kind of vibe of that piece there is sort of like evident. They're so adept at being able to find a sound that they want to write a song for and being able to emulate that. Dynamite being completely different with the funky guitar takes, the electric bass, the chord note accents on the drums and everything like that. Whereas Fake Love is more careful, and it's got this kind of 60th note kind of rolling, hi-hats and such. They're completely different environments that are created. Now, I've already spoken about each of these 5 tracks within their individual little mini conclusions. So to go through all of them independently would be like a 30-minute conclusion. And I want to keep this one relatively succinct within reason. But just structurally, they all work very well with their various sort of verse and chorus transfers, occasional bridges as well, which is really neat. And we have no real lead sections or alt leads. The closest we got to something kind of outside the box for a lot of the pop music that I've been checking out recently is in the Coldplay track, My Universe with BTS, where they had that kind of like chopped up kind of like beat at the end of the point, and it was kind of unpredictable because of that. But I think that was for the betterment of the album to sort of transfer into something different, as opposed to be something that sort of like exemplified what BTS was all about. But I think the strength of BTS is being able to express themselves authentically with what they're discussing on top of the motif they're presented with. And with a lot of these tracks, there are some instruments that carry across to kind of add a sense of consistency, but there's nothing that kind of really kind of catches you by surprise. I think there are moments with Dynamite where we have like the kind of claps in space of the snare drum, which is kind of cool because it sounds like you're celebrating together. But I think, yeah, a lot of what's going on instrumentally, whether it's the different synth pads or leads there, the major or minor leanings, with minor specifically being for Fake Love, because a lot of Dynamite, Boy With Love, Left and Right, and My Universe, they're typically major oriented, even when we're sort of discussing things that are a little bit difficult, I think a lot of it is that BTS are trying to create music that's trying to be sort of like upbeat and more sort of like positive for the people that listen to it. I think Fake Love was meant to sort of be like maybe a way to sort of ground themselves and show that they're not necessarily happy all the time in a way that is relatable to an audience. But yeah, I think they are very sort of aware of the stylistic leanings of the people they work to, with that kind of like the string sections with Halsey with Left and Right having like with the left and right, like with the panning of different elements, like the kicks on either side of the stereo field, that was cool. But it's very much kind of like making sure that Charlie Puth is comfortable with what's going on with the piece. So they blend into the element, they sing well they need to, they stole the tories that they need to. The chord progressions and bass lines usually suit the mood of what they need to. There is enough. They're not massive shifts. They're very much pop music for pop music, but you can understand through, again, the structurally the rap sections and then the vocal sections are segmented with variations to keep them interesting. Although there are some songs which have less rapping than others, and some parts which have less singing than others to suit the mood and be a little bit more serious, I suppose, like Fake Love there. It's kind of weird because when you look at the tracks individually, you notice all those little intricacies and what they're trying to sort of like develop and ascribe there. But like, there's nothing with these tracks that would tell me that it was BTS without their vocals on top. It's just they're so distinctive and people recognize their textures and timbres that they are what makes the songs. And for example, while I wasn't familiar enough with Left and Right to really sit like with Jungkook, if I'm not mispronouncing his name, I wasn't familiar enough with Jung at that point to sort of tell the difference between him and Charlie Puth. Just 'cause, again, I was getting into it. With the exception of Boy With Love, I feel like Left and Right in my universe would have been lesser without BTS being involved with them. But I don't think that Left and Right in My Universe would be lesser if Coldplay and Charlie Puth weren't in them. It's kind of a weird situation we're in. And that's maybe a spicy take, but I don't know. So thematically, again, similar comments. They typically find the correct bass for patterns and chord progressions. They use extensions like in Fake Love with their guitar pick stuff when they need to sort of like articulate a more sort of nuanced tone to things. They're adept at adjusting certain percussive or rhythmic performances or instruments to sort of add more kind of edge, like in Fake Love. They're capable of adding more instruments to sort of infer a sense of like things being sort of more bombastic and exciting, like with Dynamite. Like to kind of spice things up and add a bit more sort of prominence in the upper end. And also they do key changes, sort of boost their very sort of like catchy sounding themes up a step when they need to, if they've got a little bit too much consistency. Because I think with Dynamite, if they hadn't gone up that step and really sort of elevated to party, I think it just would have been a little bit flat. So they knew that they'd had enough there to kind of keep us going with the consistency of the vocals. That key change was the icing on the cake with that one, and part of why it has 2 billion plays at this point in time. Studio production wise, it's commercial grade. Like, I would be very surprised if BTS ever released a track which was not commercial grade in terms of its production. All the different vocal takes are carried well, whether there is any sort of like they're clean vocals or they're rapped or there's some light tuning on them, like some sort of like synth or vocoder-ish kind of sounds like in certain tracks there, or like the kind of filtered vocals, or like all the responses, or more sort of like melodic vocals, whatever type of vocals. Wherever they're spread in the frequency stereo field and the frequency spectrum were well leveled and well EQ'd and well compressed and glued. There is dynamic range to them. They're not squeezed, but they sound like they can sing at the same time. It's not to fix a performance. It's just to elevate and suit the mood of the piece that they're singing over. The tracks in general are well leveled with the instrumental parts as well. There's careful attention to detail with the EQing of certain components, as well as the positioning of those in the stereo field. I think one that sort of like it'll be backwards for you, but you can hear how like the panning of those different vocal takes goes from left to right or right to left respectively, and it's just really clever how they make that handle. Like it's just that it's almost like a bit on the nose for me, but I think simply just for the sake of audience attention and stuff like that, retention there, having those kind of like those elements there audible, those differences, it kind of gives you a more interesting experience when you're paying active attention to it, doing active listening there, which is part of, again, why I'm doing these top fives, is to really focus in on these tracks and sort of really appreciate them better. And so, again, the panning decisions there are great. There are some sort of sequencing decisions with things going left and right with certain patterns via automation as well, which are kind of neat with the synth parts and sort of sparkles there, like with My Universe. The compression limiting across the board is handled. So these tracks are nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression limiting is handled. And even if I didn't necessarily agree with some of the production decisions on like the collab tracks, such as My Universe, where I feel like the drums could have had a bit more oomph, I do generally understand why they made the decisions they have with the certain instruments within the piece and how they sort of like work with the vocals. And in general, again, these are 5 really well produced songs. So ultimately, if we just go back to here for a moment, I'd say my favorite track from today is like probably Dynamite, but Fake Love is a close second. If there was a track I wasn't as much of a fan of, it's My Universe, but that's because I've never really been a massive fan of Coldplay. I've heard them live and I just wasn't really super into what he was doing then. He's just not as good live, in my opinion. From hearing Coldplay live, they're just not as good live as they are in the studio. And I know that's a common thing, that people aren't the same as, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that they're different, you know. But I get the feeling just simply from hearing BTS that they are really tight. And I would actually not... I mean, I don't know if I'd necessarily enjoy everything, but I think after listening to these 5 tracks today, I not only have a better understanding of who they are as an act, I would actually consider going to a show of theirs, because I just feel like it'd just be a really good time. But yeah, those are effectively my thoughts on BTS for the top 5. Again, the tracks being Left and Right, Boy With Love, Dynamite, Fake Love, and My Universe. And thank you for watching my review of these 5 tracks. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via their various social medias, as well as their Spotify page. We're going to be back next week I won't be doing a top 5 next week. I will be doing an album review of Plastic Beach by the Gorillaz. It's an album that has been requested by one of the patrons via the Patreon, because patrons who are on the $12 tier get an annual album review. So that'll be cool. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever. Thought of crazy stuff going on in the world. And one more note as well. This video will be going live on the Patreon for $1 tier and up. It'll have no ads. So if you want to watch this in post, if you're kind of late to the party, you want to watch this without any YouTube ads, you can just go to the Patreon for $1 a month and just watch it there. But anyways, stay cool, Shredders. Have a great weekend. Spider hands out. 3, 2, 1.